We're here to share a story of a First Nations student who attended Indian residential schools. In First Nations culture, children are traditionally surrounded by the love of their families and communities. Their parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, cousins, and elders raise them together as a community.
Unfortunately, when Europeans came to North America, the ways of life of the First Nations people changed forever, and sadly they have been dealt with many injustices.
One injustice that young First Nations people were forced to endure was being sent to Indian residential schools. Many terrible things happened in these schools, and now, years later, our government was responsible and they have publicly apologized to the First Nations community and survivors of residential schools.
On our journey towards truth and reconciliation in Parkland School Division, we have identified some first initial steps in how to move forward in addressing the 94 calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. For over 100 years, there were students that went through the residential school system and lost their culture and lost their identity. And as a result, there is residual trauma still happening today. That is a truth that we need to recognize. And that's what a lot of our schools are doing right now, is to educate students in what did happen, what is the history of Canada in relation to the residential schools. And then from there, once we have that understanding, how do we move forward? How do we build relationships with our Aboriginal neighbors? And how do we reconciliate and move forward in that relationship?
So this is the blanket exercise. It's an interactive exercise, and it was developed following the landmark report on the Royal Commission of Aboriginal Peoples. And it explores the relationship between the Crown and the Indigenous peoples of Canada from the time the settlers' arrival to modern times. In our experience, we will understand how colonization of the land we know now as Canada has impacted the people who lived here long before settlers arrived. Through this experience, you will explore nation-to-nation relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in Canada, how this relationship has been damaged over the years, and how they can work towards reconciliation.
This is what our parents went through. This is what our grandparents went through. 1887, my grandfather and my grandmother went to the Red Deer residential school. I got so emotional watching you people out there. Even my feet were starting to shake. That's how emotional I got.
In the dinner hall, all the boys and girls sat on opposite sides of the room. Brothers and sisters not allowed to talk to one another.
We were just, asked, do you know anything about residential schools? No one knew. Our teacher read us a book, and since I'm part of the leadership club, now we're gonna get to present to grade 1s, 2s, and 3s. So we get a different book. We have 3 books. We go there and just kind of read the book. We have a few questions planned out that we ask them, and we try to teach them a bit more about residential schools.
Well, when we first got taught about it, I was very surprised because it had never come up. No one had ever told me about it, and I was surprised that people had treated the First Nations that way, and sort of sad and wished we could go back and make a difference or change something.
And Grey Wolf had long, beautiful, dark braids that meant that he was going to grow up to be a warrior, which meant that he would grow up to protect his family and keep them safe, and to help the elders and to help the little ones. Well, they pulled him out of the wagon, and the first thing they did was they chopped off his braids, and they cut his hair, and then they scrubbed his skin so hard it felt like it was gonna fall off. And the story that we used in this particular case was the story about a young boy who would be their same age, who went and experienced residential school for the first time. And so we wanted to do that in order to spark for them thoughts of compassion, so they could relate. And if they can relate, maybe if the young boy was thinking about things that made him happy in times of sadness, they could do that too and find that relationship and that connection. So we talked about some things that would make Grey Wolf happy? Are you happy? And one of the things that you mentioned was the music, right? The songs and the stories. We try to keep it as less bleak as possible, while at the same time still sort of communicating the isolation the kids in residential school experienced. And so the questions that the kids have tend to be on that same level: who they would miss, what they would love, why did they have to go, you know, simple things like that.
All of those children got taken away to these schools called residential schools. And my friend Clara was one of those people who was taken away as a child to go to these schools.
Well, I told them about my stay at residential school, and it was not a good place to be. When they came and got me, I was so scared. I had never been away from my parents, and they took me to residential school.
You're decorating a heart for one child who was taken from their home, okay? So Clara is one, but there was many, 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 many children who were taken from their homes. So each heart is gonna represent one of those child that we wanna say sorry to.
Is it okay to be different? Yes. Is it okay to wear a different shirt than someone else? Is it okay to have a different hairstyle? Is it okay to have different colored skin? Yes.
I guess that I'd like them to know that it's not our fault. It was the government's fault. And I hope in their generation that things will be different, that they will get along with other Native children, and everybody to be happy together, you know.
I just want to say a few words to all the students. First of all, I am deeply honored that you have invited me today for this celebration. It truly means a lot to me. What I have been taught about the rock, what it means is faith. It means that we have faith in the Creator who created the universe. The mountains are made up of rocks. The mountains represent faith.
There's a compounding effect of generations of people who've been taken away from their culture and their identity, and then thrown back into the community with all of this dysfunction that they got at residential school. And so it has accumulated until we see a lot of the social issues that are in the news today. And so it will take a while for that to get healed. And so if kids understand what happened, why it happened, then they can understand what they're seeing in front of them now, and sort of, you know, understand, okay, so I didn't do it, my parents didn't do it, but we can still extend compassion and figure out a way to make it work for everyone.
Parkland School Division, where the world opens up.